And we are ready to do Batch Life with Flummer. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you. So, yeah, we'll just tell a short who I am, and then we'll get into the hardware parts about badges, specifically the Bornhack badge, and also a little about other badges in these conferences. And specifically, DEF CON has been crazy with badges this year, and also shitty add-ons. Yes, that's the name of them. So for those who don't know me, I do electronic badges, has been doing it for a couple of years. For all of the Bornhacks I've been doing, simple ones in the beginning, the first one. Last year we had a little screen and to play with, but I do software development for a living, my day job. I also hang out in Labitats at Hackerspace in Copenhagen, where I mostly play with electronics, 3D printers, and few occasional video software, photo projects. So if we look a little at the sort of electronic badges, DEF CON has been one of those who, like years ago, started and been playing with badges, and also Chaos Communication Camp has been doing it for many years. DEF CON is conference every year, and they have been doing these badges. And in the beginning it was very simple. It was just a little LED blinking and so on, shaped as the DEF CON Scully logo. But later on they got more and more advanced, and at some years they delivered the badges like almost after the DEF CON was over, because they simply couldn't sort of manage to get them done in time. Now the DEF CON, they are on sort of a TikTok schedule where every other year they do an electronic badge. The other years they do like a non-electronic, like an analog of some sort of puzzle or something like that. Most badges of these conferences have some sort of functionality. There's electronic, there's some LEDs lighting up, a controller or something that you can play with. And they are also usually non-square. They have some sort of interesting shape. It's shaped as something, some object, or simply just a creative way of shaping the badges. At DEF CON this year, they made 26,000 badges, shared about like 8 different styles for the different people. That's a lot of badges. It's a large production. Here at Bornhack, we only made 300. So the first 300 will get a badge. This is one of the badges from another conference. That's the SHA conference last year. Had an e-ink screen, CapSense buttons, and wireless module, Wi-Fi module on the back. They had a whole little app store, very sort of heavy on the ease of getting into programming and doing your own stuff on it. Another example of a badge is this one from the Hackaday Belgrade conference, like 4 months ago. This had like a full keyboard. You could type your own little basic programs on the badge and run them on the badge. So that was kind of fun to sit in the audience and just sitting typing there, and you're like 300 people just typing on this. They had a little speaker on the back also, could play Mario and so on. So this year's Bornhack badge, there's sort of 2 focuses. One was to give all of you guys something new to play with, something that hasn't been on the previous badges. And the other one was to sort of look at the catch line for this year, the scale it thing, and have production in China. So it wasn't Labitat guys just sitting there and soldering, but having the real production. So that was one of the other focus. The feature focus is wireless communication. So there's a 2.4 gigahertz wireless radio on the badge with a little antenna. Let's see. Yeah, that's the badge for those who already not have picked up it yet. PCB production, like the regular, just making the PCB in China, have them shipped here so you can sell them yourself, that's gotten really, really cheap. There's a whole slew of different companies you can order from, and it costs next to nothing. But the new black in sort of recent years within PCB production stuff is having the Chinese companies assemble the boards, and that's also gotten more sort of easy to get into. Seed Studio has a very sort of automated where you can upload all stuff and get a quote before you actually sort of confirm the order and you know exactly what it costs. But it's way easier if you sort of keep within the Seed Studio parts library. You can go out of it, but it's easier to keep it within that. And the shipping times get a little shorter if you do that. But PCBWay is another one, and when you sort of look at the volume we're doing here, PCBWay's pricing seems to be more, it's simply lower, and they don't charge as much for the assembly process and so on. And this year they also offered to sponsor part of it. So all the assembly and so on, that they sponsored that. I was a little afraid of the communication because for regular PCBs, just the PCB part of it, there's standard formats for the files you have to send, and you usually get pretty close to what you ordered when you receive the boards. Like slight quality differences, but the boards are functional and look as you ask. But when you need to put parts on, you need to have files that's explaining exactly where the part are, how it's rotated, which part it is, and so on. That sort of, there's not a standard format that all of them uses for that. They sort of have their own little differences. So there need to be some sort of communication with the Chinese production guys there, and there's time differences and so on. But I was actually surprised how well it worked. They seem to have people that are sort of working in European hours. So I could be emailing back and forth. I don't have to wait another day to get a reply. And they're very good at asking for what they needed first, and they know that, okay, I need the BOM file so we can order the parts, because customs going into China is tricky. So they need to get that sorted first, and then afterwards they ask for what they needed, and they could actually take placement files directly out of KiCad, and that's pretty neat. So it was fairly easy to get going, and all the batches that we have been programming today, none of them had failed in the programming. If you guys receive a batch where it doesn't work, just come to the camp. But I think all of them will actually work and haven't had any issues with that. This is a few pictures from the factory. So they have like a machine put up next to each other. First the solder paste stencil that puts the solder paste on, then pick and place that puts the components, and then it's finally in the oven where they're heated and comes out on these little panels. The extra parts that goes around the batch is needed for the conveyor belt to carry it through the machines. And there was a bunch of friendly guys who helped take all these parts off the batches yesterday and solder all the battery holders on. That was very nice. So the batch electronics is the same chip as last year, the Scilab's Happy Gecko. It's connected to USB, so you can program in the same way as last year. But in addition to that chip, there's also Nordic RF51822. It's the same microcontroller and radio that sits on the BBC microbit. So if somebody wants to play with sort of utilizing some of the tool chains for the microbit and remodeling them for this, that would be awesome. This chip has Bluetooth Low Energy. You can put a little binary blob in there and make it do that. Or you can use Nordic's proprietary protocols for 2.4 gigahertz if you want to play with that also. I think you can do some sort of mesh with that protocol, but I'm not sure. For the Happy Gecko, the same chip as last year. You can use the same tool chain as last year. On the Bornhack GitHub, there's a batch 2018 repo that has instructions on how to get the tool chain up and running on different platforms. For the Nordic chip, right now the recommended way of programming it is by using embed, because all the libraries and so on, they are part of that. You can simply choose the standard Nordic dev kit for this chip, and then the hex file you make out of that, get out of that, you can put that on the board via the bootloader that's available for the Gecko. So the Happy Gecko chip, the same as last year, can program the Nordic chip so that you still only need the one micro USB cable to interface with all of it. So the Happy Gecko is in the middle, and in the corner here, we have a radio chip, and there's a little trace antenna going all the way up here. So the antenna is actually antenna. There's also 4 buttons. They're actually the same pins on the Happy Gecko as they were on last year's batch. So if you want to reuse, you can do that. The main bootloader on the Happy Gecko is the same as last year, but it has a few improvements. One of them being that you can actually toggle the power switch. So if you accidentally went into bootloader mode, you can just press the power button and you get out of it again. So you don't have to connect it or reboot it by taking out the batteries. The other sort of bootloader parts that has been written, Esmil is the one who writes all the code, and he has made a bootloader that when you can put as payload on the Happy Gecko, and that can then be used to program the Nordic chip. It uses a bit of power because it doesn't throttle down, for the CPU down, so when you're sort of done programming the Nordic, you should put something else on there. Both of these binary files will be available on the GitHub. You can just download them directly. You can also build them yourself if you want that. So yeah, as I mentioned, the board has a PCB antenna. I'm not an antenna designer, so it's not maybe not the ideal design for the antenna, but it seems to work fairly well. So there's communication, and it will show up on the phone if you run Bluetooth Low Energy and so on. There's also 4 buttons and 4 LEDs. The LEDs are not exactly the same because there wasn't 4 LEDs on the board last year, but the buttons are the same, except X and Y is not here anymore. And then in the top of the PCB, there are little, if we look up here, just below the USB connector, there are 4 pins that can be used to add on a display if you really want to play with the display. They're not included, but they can be bought really cheap from eBay. It's like 20 kroner or so. And then there are 4 shitty add-on connectors. Shitty add-ons are a standard that some of the guys from Hackaday sort of developed for badges to make it really easy to add extra stuff to a badge or make a simple badge you can put on top of it. So it's these 4 pins. This is voltage, like VCC. This is ground. And I think this is SDA and SCL for I2C communication. The hole in the middle is just because you can use a reverse-mounted connector on the back, and that has a little guide hole, the guide plastic knob to fit it in there. You don't need to use the middle hole. So we've designed a bunch of add-on boards. So all of you who have gotten a badge have gotten one of, I think, 5 different add-on boards. Some of them are really shitty. Some of them can do a little bit more. But they're sort of chosen so that everybody can sort of start to play with electronics on whatever level they are. So the simple ones is just an LED you can solder on and blinking. Some of the more advanced one has like tiny little SMD components. Most of them follow the shitty add-on standard with these 4 pins. But a few of them needs a little bit more because they use SPI, and there's no SPI in the shitty add-on standard. If you sort of want another one of these add-ons, either trade with others or come to the Labitat village, we will have a bunch of extras you can have and play with. And we also have soldering irons, so we can solder on stuff. These are the 5 ones that has been sort of somewhat tested. I have 2 more, but I couldn't get them working. So none of those has been handed out, but I have them if you want to play with them. This one here is an I/O expander, so you can control each of the 8 I/Os, and they're designed to put LEDs on there so you can have them blinking. This is for a LoRa module. I put a LoRa module on here, so if you want to play with LoRa, low energy wireless, that's an option. The one in the middle here is a little temp sensor. There's a tiny little one here, a little chip that can sort of sense temperature. The 2 up there is just blinking LED. I have LEDs that blink themselves, either slowly fading different colors or doing it fast. And the last one is just a prototyping board where you can add on whatever you have. And they mount on the little shitty add-on connector on the top, or on the bottom here where it's, this one needs SPI connection here, so that only goes there. It's also here with the prototyping. You can mount it on all the different areas. It's the same connector. So the temp stuff and the I/O expander. So at this year's DEF CON, it kind of exploded. There's an official badge that's handed out to all participants. But in addition to the official one, there was about 100 different other unofficial badges that either groups or individuals had designed and made and was selling or giving away. Many of them were sort of to fund a hackerspace, or some of them were doing a party and renting a suite at the Caesars and just having a party all night. And to get in, you could buy one of these badges, and then that was your ticket to get in. Also, a lot of these shitty add-ons was made. Most of them were artistic and just adding a few LEDs, maybe some blinking. So this is the official DEF CON badge. It had little LEDs on the back that was lighting up through the PCB. I have one, so if you can see and come to the Habitat Village and see them and try them out. This is another one where they did a shitty add-on with a shaped as a Tide Pod, and the idea, they have a little memory chip on the back that has a cryptographic string. That the idea is that the robot eats these Tide Pods, and then it puts these cryptographic string into a blockchain thingy on the badge. So they wanted to run the full hype train. And on the back, it has like 200 and something little LEDs that can light up as a screen, and a wireless module in the bottom. This is another badge, a group from San Diego. They put a lot of colorful LEDs on there, and then they have a breathalyzer on the top. So yeah, you can see how drunk or whatever. And this is also a group called DC 801. They did the whole party thing. They rented a 2-story suite and had a party, and this was one of the badges for entry into the party. There was also a game on there that where a participant, they can sort of find other participants that are close by with a wireless module. This here was a little goon box badge with a screwdriver. You can sort of send IR signals, and then the box will blink up with all the boxes in nearby and so on. That was just a couple designing those, making them, and then selling them at DEF CON. And then to the shitty add-ons. The standard is really simple. It was sort of written up at a bar on a napkin, and that sort of stayed. The idea was to keep it really so low barrier that everybody could get in. There has been talk about making it a little bit more advanced for next year, but we'll see. The really simple thing makes a lot of people sort of get into playing and say, okay, I can do that, and then making a badge or an add-on of some sort. I have a workshop it's 5 o'clock today. So if some of you guys want to learn how to make your own little add-on or some other board, focusing on the artistic side, sort of bringing artwork from like a regular art programs, drawing programs into the PCB world, feel free to come by. This is one of the add-ons where they also mounted LEDs on the back. And I got a final slide here. The most important is probably the URL in the bottom. That's where all the info on the badge will be. It's very similar to last year, it's just 8 instead of 7 in the end. Any questions?
Do you guys happen to have some OLED modules for sale also?
I have very few OLED modules, yes. Come see me at the Habitat Village.
Any more questions?
How broad is the compatibility with the microbit?
It's the exact same chip, but the buttons and the LEDs on the microbit the LEDs are not there. And I think the buttons might be on a lot of locations, but a lot of the IOs, let's see if you can find a picture of that. Yeah. So all the IOs over here, they are just 12 IOs that are pulled out from the Nordic chip, and they are very sort of assignable. You can pretty much choose where you want anything on that chip. It just check out, I want the UART here on that pin, and you will get that. So you can break stuff out there if you need something specific.
Yeah. Is the microbit programming software compatible with this? Can you use the same hex files?
I haven't tried, but if it makes a hex file, I think so, yes. I'd love to try it. I haven't done it yet.
Any more questions? Yes?
So the firmware that's loaded by default, does it do anything interesting? Or
It does not do anything super interesting. It tests that the LEDs and the buttons are working, and it's the sort of standard sketch that's sort of you can start out of. It's on the GitHub page. That's the master branch on that site, where you can add in your own stuff you want to do.
Okay, thanks.
Go to the Habitat Village to get your badge,
Yeah.
and go to the workshop, and give Flummer an applause.
It also be we'll also be doing some hacking competition. So if you want to join in there, have fun, give it a go.
Thank you.
Yeah.